between that 14 and 16 years of age was probably for me, it was a very hard time. It was a very difficult time. It was a time where I was thinking about going to go live with my father. But at the time, he was married and my stepmother, I didn't understand what manners were. I didn't understand having rules. So I'm like, I don't want any of that. So I can't live there because that doesn't fit with my lifestyle, right? But I can remember running away at 14 or 15 and taking off to Pennsylvania with friends, and coming back to try to figure stuff out. But I was rebellious. Life was a challenge for me. I didn't understand why I was here. I didn't feel like I had a purpose. And then it was just compounded by the environment that I lived in. Always yelling, always the belt, always stuff going on that was just affected me mentally. But I wouldn't say it was a means to cope, because even when I started smoking, you start smoking to be cool and to fit in. I get addicted to that. Then I'm the guy that smokes 2 packs a day for 7 years until I figure out how to stop that. So this addiction process for me has been there. And what I've discovered is in life, it can be good or bad. It's how you use it. So if you want to use it for nutrition or fitness, or doing the right thing, you can be addicted to that. And that's okay, right? So it's almost like choose your, you can be an addict, but what's your choice? Like, what do you want to be addicted to?
This is Jen Sugarmeyer, your Recovery Today magazine correspondent, bringing you stories of strength and hope. And today we are joined with Dean O'Shaughnessy, the president of the DNS Agency. Thank you so much, Dean, for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I did a little digging in your background and I couldn't find a whole lot. So I do want to start off with a story of kind of how we got here today. And I don't believe in coincidences, but from my perspective, this is how this all came about. Somehow on this powerful social media tool of Facebook, you and I connected. And I don't know if I friended you or if you friended me, but somehow we connected. And my account is relatively new, I would say within the last year or so. And I don't spend a whole lot of time on it. And I started to see these posts pop up, the most positive posts I've seen. And I was so inspired. My day job is I work as a life coach and I do a lot of mindset work. And everything I saw, I thought, man, this is so spot on. So I started interacting with your posts, which means every time I open Facebook, you're at the top of the algorithm. And I don't know you. I don't know who you are. We didn't have any mutual friends. And at some point I'm like, I don't even know how much to interact with your posts because I like to drop GIFs and memes. And I'm like, is that appropriate? I don't even know. Like, is he going to think I'm this weird, I don't know. And then there was one day and you mentioned that you were celebrating 6 years of sobriety. And it was every kind of question, because I'm like, who is this guy? Like, he's just really has motivational and inspiring posts, very solid on mindset and very inspirational. And when I saw that, I said, everything in my mind made sense. And as I said, I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that God winks and we need to pay attention. And so when I saw that, that's when I started to pay attention a little more. And I just did a little kind of, I was looking at your profile and, saw pictures of your family and some of the things that you were doing. And I reached out and I said, hey, would you like to be in the magazine? And here we are today. So that's my story. You may say that I was this crazy stalker. I don't know what your version of the story is, but that's my version of the story of how we got here today. And I am so grateful that you made the time to speak with our listeners because I believe you have such an impactful story. So I'm looking forward. Like I said, I couldn't find a whole lot of information. So this is going to be as new to me as it is to all of the listeners. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think I remember just, seeing you comment on something. And I want to say that it might have been with Michael Moulton.
Oh,
um,
okay.
who's in Dallas, who has a
Yes.
show.
Yes.
And I had actually met Michael, and he had come to a lunch. Him and his previous person, Jennifer Brown, they had come and met with me a few years ago when I was living in Dallas. And I think they were just starting the show, or Michael was just starting his show, because I think
Mhm.
he's had it for two or
About
three
3 years.
about
Yeah.
3 years. So this would have been in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I can remember just meeting him, and Jennifer was interested in music, and we're talking about that path. And then there was Michael that was there, was talking about, he was starting the show and talking about sponsorships, and we're just talking about where he was at, and we had this connection, just knowing, again, I think he's a lot more open than I've been, with where he's been in his path.
Yeah.
So you could probably Google him and
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I actually had my little coming out party on his show. That's where I told my story for the
okay.
first time, was on his show. And I actually interviewed him in the magazine, which featured a few months ago. So it's a small world how that all connects. And so however you and I connected, I'm so grateful that you're here today, and we can learn a little more about your story as well. So excellent.
Okay.
So I guess we'll start there. So tell us a little bit about who you are and your story.
Well, you already said my name, O'Shaughnessy. I was telling you about the bit that's out there, that people typically refer to it as like Oshag Hennessy. And so I get all kinds of varying degrees of what that looks like and sounds like. Where I had started off in retail and operations, from my background perspective, worked my way up within companies, with Sam's Walmart. Spent well over 15 years with them initially. Everything from field management, operations, marketing, facilitation, trainer, do conflict resolution, just all the different components. Then I spent time as a corporate buyer, living in Bentonville, Arkansas, and eventually had gone on to Best Buy. Had worked on me for a number of years, for quite a while, and trying to recruit me. And I thought, man, I work for the biggest company in the world. Why would I need to leave? And I also felt that I was kind of narrow. I was one-sided. I knew one type of business, and technology was always of interest to me. And so I decided to take the leap and went over to work with Best Buy. And my skill set was always to take markets or stores or locations and work on turning around to be profitable. And so to work with the teams, develop the teams, teach, coach, and train, hold people accountable, set standards. And then typically that process runs between 12 and 14 months. And then you're asked to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And after I had left Best Buy, I went to go work with a company called Sears Holdings. And a mentor of mine, Jim Hayworth, who was the CEO of Walmart, he was running Sears Holdings as the president. So he had connected with a lot of us that had worked with him in the past, and had asked if we would take an opportunity to come work with him and help him with that organization. So I spent almost 5 years overseeing all of Central California for that company, 18 locations, 3,000 people, and had an opportunity to kind of do the same thing with the same skill set. And meanwhile, one of the things that was important to me when I worked with Best Buy was I found that there was an opportunity to work with local artists, because if a local artist, we always had major artists come in, do signings. There was always media hype and these type of things when they were on tour. And what I found was that with local artists, there wasn't a means for them to be connected. Nobody knew how to get music in the stores, how do they grow their careers. So I started venturing out to see local musicians and being connected with local artists. And so I kind of became a liaison in my spare time for local artists to know there was a way to get music into Best Buy. There was a process if you weren't signed to a label. There was a structured process, but unless you knew somebody, nobody knew what that was.
So when was this? Put us in a time frame.
Let's see here. So the Best Buy and working with the local artists would have started about 05, 06.
Okay.
And again, I started doing that as a hobby. I'd been married 15 years. I'd gone through a divorce, didn't know what to do with my spare time. My trainer at the Gold's Gym, he was in a band, and he was, hey, you got to come out and see my band. And they played at some pizzeria, like in the corner. And I was like, it was the coolest experience to see your friend play in this group in this setting. So when I had joined Best Buy in 2005, it was between 2005 and 2006 where I started to get integrated into the local music scene out in Northern California. So that's what kind of started this passion to work with artists in their careers and figure out how how I could help them or how we could move things forward. But again, it initially started because couldn't have a conflict of interest, just as a hobby.
So it was just kind of a side project.
Paid for anything. Okay. It was. I probably spent more money on that than anything, because I would spend money on marketing for a band. I would spend money on, I helped fund an album before. I would just invest time and money into something I believed in, because I think life's, about people, and paying it forward. And how do you take things that you can do and you can contribute, whether it's, acts of service, doing things, being generous, helping others, teaching, mentoring. And so that's what I started doing that just initially. And I had to form an LLC because artistry, nobody would listen to an artist unless they were signed to a management company.
Sure.
Nobody. So, I mean, I was able to get endorsement deals, get sponsorships from, SWR and PV and Fender and all of these endorsements because of just because of who I was and working with local artists. And they were just local artists, but it was a big deal for them to have a sponsorship from Fender, and they would promote Fender at every show, and they would play their gear, and they'd put them in the videos, and they'd put them on all their posters. And so, it was definitely a win-win situation for both, the companies and for the artists.
Was this the DNS agency that you had formed at that time?
So I started the LLC back in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it was the side project that you're working, and you're still working in Best Buy.
Yep. And went on to Sears Holdings. And then I had an opportunity to, I had some friends they had a hearing company, and they'd asked me to come out to Texas. And I became a vice president for a hearing company. I had 5 states. And so I transitioned into the hearing industry. And so what was interesting about this hearing company was, it was, working with doctors and audiologists in locations, but it was now working on the other side as a vendor with Sam's Club and Walmart. So I would be in meetings now on the other side of the table, having spent my entire career working on the other side with them or for them. Now I was a vendor. Yeah. So I had state of Texas, part of Louisiana, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada was my market. So, and I had done that for a couple of years, and then they restructured. And when they did that, the position that I had held was eliminated. So
I've been there. Yes.
it happens. And so yes. I've always been the person that's had the conversation. So when the conversation was had with me on the restructure and the reorganization with the new president and a new administration, I understood,
Yep. Yep. And, and going back to the When God Winks, I believe that those are times we need to just pay attention. And so from Sears Holding, where did you go?
I went to the Hearing Lab Company, which was based out of Grand Prairie. So I had relocated to Dallas. I lived in a place called Bishop Arts, which is a quaint little subdivision.
I lived there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not very big, so we could have been neighbors.
Yeah.
But it allowed for easy travel. I would travel Tuesday through Friday or Tuesday through Saturday out of Love Field. And so between, Austin, Houston were big markets, but then traveling to New Mexico, Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, it just lent itself to, being conducive. So not being married, kids were grown. So it allowed me the opportunity, the flexibility. So it was good. It was a good opportunity. It was good place to live.
Yeah. 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 I enjoyed it. I lived down there for about 4 years. So
There's a little dessert. Did you ever go to that little dessert place? It's
the
like the
pie
pie.
place. Yeah.
Yes, the pie. Yes.
Yes.
Is it?
Emporium pies. Hmm.
Yes. Yes, I like that place.
I did too. Yeah. Unfortunately. Yes. I learned about that place. So, so you've made the transition now into, I am very curious how, because I want to tie this into your story. I know you've got a very strong corporate background. I certainly can relate to that in my own past. And what's going on? What are people not seeing? What is going on behind the scenes with you? So I know you're now 6 years into sobriety. Where does that play into your life as you're going through all these changes in California to Texas and that?
Well, one of the things that was probably a pivotal point for me with my company where I'm at was in about 5 years ago. I had met Scott Stapp and Jacqueline Stapp, and Scott had formed a band called Creed back in 2000s, and so we became friends. And Jacqueline and I had worked on some of her grant programs and things on the personal side. And so what had happened was, we had spoken. They were going to go out on this big tour, and they had asked about providing security, if I knew anybody who was a bodyguard, if I knew anybody that worked in that field. And a cousin of mine, Wayne Morgan, he's worked with Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton, taking care of them. He's a federal agent. He can do all kinds of stuff. And so I was like, hey, you guys, I'm going to connect you, Jacqueline, with my cousin Wayne. And he'd be perfect. I talked to Wayne. He's like, you know what? I'll go out on tour with him. I'll help him out. Make sure that it's a good environment. It was going to be, that type of environment, because Scott is sober,
Mhm.
is just ensuring, everybody as part of the team is sober, and making sure that everything works the way that it should. And it was going to be, 5 groups. It was going to be, a lot of rock bands on the road. It's going to be a U.S. tour. The name of the tour is Make America Rock Again. And so it was kind of a pivotal point for me, because what happened was the next month I'd seen Jacqueline and Scott, and they'd asked me if, they said they hadn't reached out to Wayne yet. They had thanked me, but they'd asked me if I would consider going out with them. And I thought, I'm like, what qualifications would I have, going out on the road on a tour? And so the irony of the whole thing was, when we kind of talked through, handling security, I'm like, well, I've dealt with Black Fridays and 10,000 customers, right? I've prepped teams to work through the logistics of the safety and handle the customer service. So they're like, I'm like, well, meet and greets wouldn't be an issue. Dealing with thousands of people aren't an issue. Taking care of somebody's personal security isn't an issue. Working on, representing a brand wouldn't be an issue, with who I'd be working with. Confidentiality wouldn't be an issue, right? Because when you work for a large organization, you sign the NDAs, and, you don't get to talk about anything that ever happens or anything you've ever seen or been involved in, right? So they wanted me to think about this, and they really were adamant that I give it some consideration. And again, we had a good relationship. Jacqueline and I worked on some stuff, and I really thought a lot of them both. The next week, Scott, we had a phone call, and him and I talked about going out on the road and what that would look like, and it would mean a lot to just be, knowing what I'd done. My background was like, it would be a good fit. And so kind of the rest has been kind of, like I just say, is history, because what it did was it allowed me to, one, work with artists, but to go out and kind of walk the walk and understand what happens on tour, understand what happens, all the things that an artist goes through. Because mind you, I had worked with local artists and helped them on, what I'd say is like the corporate aspect, right? The working on getting their music out, working on endorsements, sponsorships, soliciting labels for them to hear their music.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't understand some of the complexities of what goes on the day-to-day stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really gave me the opportunity to witness,
Sure.
firsthand what that was like.
Yeah.
So that was a pivotal point.
So before you had this conversation with Scott, you were working full-time in corporate.
I was.
Okay. And then after this conversation is when you decided to venture into this new.
I wrote down, I remember at the time my father, I spoke to him and, I wrote down all the pros and cons. And I thought, I was 45 years of age and I've been a corporate buyer. I've lived in 8 states. I've worked in all capacities, but my passion, desire to help other people from an artistry perspective and build a career was always there.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, wrote down the pros and the cons. And the cons were, stability, compensation. They were all superficial, right? The pros was just overwhelming. And I'm like, who gets an opportunity to get asked by great people to participate in something that is just, when you talk to somebody, about going on tour, they just like, how did you manage? People ask me, how did you get into that? I'm like, nothing's a coincidence. We get winked at, and I think we have to be open to the consideration or to like, what does that look like? But that was what had happened. And that was pivotal for me, to be able to write down the pros and the cons. And like I said, the cons were like 3 or 4 things, and they were all superficial. I'm like, I've made money, I've had success, I've done these different things, but that didn't bring happiness. It didn't bring a lot of different things that I felt like were necessary. And so they knew I was sober. And as a matter of fact, Scott's got like 2 or 3 weeks on me. We actually share the same birthday. So our birthday is August 8th, and I'm 3 years older than him. There was just all this stuff, and I'm like, it was too much of a coincidence. And I'm like, I'm in. So I went out with them, and when we got done with that tour, I started, these other artists and projects I'd worked on in the past, a lot more started to happen. And then we did a tour in 2019, which was 4 months on the road. It was a month in South America, down in Brazil. And then that continued. I continued to work with my artists, but then I continued to support Scott when he would go out. And it really was just an opportunity for me to learn everything I could, which helped. I would work from, beginning of the day and to end of the day, every single day with him. And then any downtime, I would work on, my artists and the things that we had working on and developing. So this last year during the pandemic, it was an opportunity for me to devote 100% of my energy on the artists that I'm working with and learning. And I started a record label this last year as well, to help artists and get their music out in a better way, right? Because one of the things,
which was your mission 15 years ago, right? And
it's
still, you still have that same thread, that same passion.
It's evolved to understand, there's this thing about like, once you get involved with the artists and music, you start seeing about, there's a lot of folks that make money for some reasons that they shouldn't be making money.
Yeah.
They're not helping the artist. They're not furthering a career. They're just part of something. And for me, I'm very, the folks that work with me, they would die for me and I would do the same for them. And it's like, you want to take that passion, that energy, and there's always a better way. And so one of the things, my background was to fix problems, was to take the worst situations, the worst locations, the worst markets, and give it to Dean to fix. And so from a music perspective and career perspective, it's kind of similar, where it's like, I can break down every broken component, what's not being done, what's being done, what hasn't worked, what does work, and then move things forward.
Yeah.
So it's just taking the same practices and applying it to a different industry.
Yeah. So was music always something that you had an affinity for? You liked going to maybe rock, or was that even the kind of music you listened to when you got involved
It
with
was.
all this?
I'm a product of the '80s.
Okay.
I grew up in Los Angeles, born and raised. So I can remember going to the Troubadour and the Whiskey and the Viper and all these things down on Sunset Strip. Motley Crue. I can remember Shout at the Devil had come out, and the first second Van Halen album, and when Back in Black had come out. There were things that as a child that I could listen to that just, they gave me this energy.
Yeah.
And I felt like rejuvenated. I felt like I could do anything. And it was always, for me, sometimes I didn't really get wrapped up in the lyrics as much as I did how did it make me feel? How did it, listening to a song, how did it make me feel? And so, yes, music at an early age of my life was something that I connected with, like inside. And so if I was depressed, if I was feeling down, whatever was going on in my life, I could always put the music on and be taken away. It would always give me that strength, that healing, or something that I needed to move forward to the next day.
Mm. So that just that fueled your passion to invest time and money into all of these different artists along the way.
It did, yes.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, you mind talking, can we dig into a little bit of your past with drinking and kind of how that played into your life?
Yeah, for sure. I can remember, I can remember at the earliest of age, I think it was 14-ish or 15 was when I first started experimenting with things. And, I do a lot of reflection now on things. You're like, when you go through sobriety and you go through meetings and you're talking about things, a lot of self-reflection happens, at least for me. And so I started to recall these things in my life that were just so vivid. Like the first time I think the first thing I had was like peppermint schnapps. And I can remember tasting it and then not really liking the taste, but I liked the effect. And then, I remember waiting to the next day. I couldn't wait because we're going to have more. And it was like this feeling of like, I want more of that. And then people giving me crap because I drank most of the bottle. Right. And I reflect back, I can remember at 15 drinking like a fifth of Jack Daniels and passing out on the sidewalk, and everybody left me there because I woke up in the morning and I was literally on the sidewalk of a main street in Los Angeles. And I just remember like not feeling good. But through the self-reflection, I started coming to terms that I always over-indexed. It wasn't something that was new. It wasn't something like I developed this over-indexing ability. It'd been there since day one.
Yeah. I like that term, by the way, over-indexing.
That's it's because I wasn't somebody that consumed stuff regularly.
Yeah. And
so, one of these things I can tell you, like I didn't drink every day. But when I did, it was over-indexing, was to, I pass out. Right. And so one of the things I realized was that whether it was, doing and experimenting with drugs, and all of those things that some of us have done, whether it was meth, whether it was coke, whether it was freebasing, it didn't matter. But self-reflection was I always over-indexed. And I felt good around people that, if there was stuff left, I did it. And it's, whether it was a bottle, whether it was on a mirror, it was, I did it.
Yeah. When you look back, are there things that you were running from, things that you wanted to mask? Was this things that you had grown up around with your family? What do you think brought you into the circle of wanting to, try these different, whatever it may be?
Well, I had a difficult upbringing. My parents were divorced when I was 3. My mother was verbally and physically abusive. And And I can remember my brother passed away when I was 16. So between that 14 and 16 years of age was probably for me, it was a very hard time. It was a very difficult time. It was a time where I was thinking about going to go live with my father. But at the time, he was married and my stepmother, I didn't understand what manners were. I didn't understand having rules. So I'm like, I don't want any of that. So I can't live there because that doesn't fit with my lifestyle, right? But I can remember running away at 14 or 15 and taking off to Pennsylvania with friends, and coming back to try to figure stuff out. But I was rebellious. Life was a challenge for me. I didn't understand why I was here. I didn't feel like I had a purpose. And then it was just compounded by the environment that I lived in. Always yelling, always the belt, always stuff going on that was just affected me mentally. But I wouldn't say it was a means to cope, because even when I started smoking, you start smoking to be cool and to fit in. I get addicted to that. Then I'm the guy that smokes 2 packs a day for 7 years until I figure out how to stop that. So this addiction process for me has been there. And what I've discovered is in life, it can be good or bad. It's how you use it. So if you want to use it for nutrition or fitness, or doing the right thing, you can be addicted to that. And that's okay, right? So it's almost like choose your, you can be an addict, but what's your choice? Like, what do you want to be addicted to? And I think that, we can be addicted to helping people or doing the right thing, or, being a positive influence on others. Physical fitness, you and I kind of talked about, because I know you had competed once, and it's been something that I've wanted to do in my life. So the addiction and the process, the good eating habits.
Yeah.
You can be addicted to that. And I can do that just as easily as I can bad things. Yeah. It's like choose your topic.
I think you touch on a really strong point, and I'm smiling because it resonates. And I think it resonates with a lot of listeners. I don't think being an addict is a bad thing. I'm an addict, and it's something I've had to learn to manage within my own self. And if we understand the power of addiction, we can do exactly what you just spoke into, which is to channel that energy into nutrition, to helping others, to becoming, the best version of ourselves. I know when I got sober, I became addicted to loving myself because I didn't. And so I took 1 year and I said, I'm going to learn to love myself. And I took all of that addiction, because it took me 10 years to get sober. I took all of that energy and I put it into myself. So I just think it's such a strong, so I wanted to reiterate that to anybody who's listening. And I think there's a lot of shame and stigma around this word addiction. And I don't think a lot of people understand addicts, but it can be an incredible tool. And I always said that my bosses are so lucky, whomever, I'm an entrepreneur now, but my bosses were always so lucky, because whatever project I was on, or whatever I was leading, or whatever I was doing, I was a rock star. And now in my own life, I am, but it's understanding and channeling that energy into the right thing. So I didn't want to catch you off guard. I just really wanted to speak into that.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I deal with the same thing. I hear people talk about it. But when you put it in context about pizza or desserts or chocolate, like, people will come forward and be like, oh yeah, I've got to have chocolate every day. Or somebody comes forward. So I said, addiction lives, I feel like, in everybody to some capacity, but for some reason it's associated with like this negative, like whether it's heroin or whether it's alcohol or drug abuse, it's like, no. Yeah. I've met people and they're like, they get it because they can't sit down, a normal person, without eating an extra large pizza. Like, they can't stop.
Yeah.
Or if they start to eat cake, they have to have so much until they're stuffed.
Yes.
You hear people always talk about things about, every time I do this or whatever, like, I feel so miserable after. And those are like subline things that have to do with addiction.
Yeah.
But, one of the first things that we have to admit is like, we have a problem.
Mhm.
And it's okay to admit that, right? To say, you know what, I understand it. I'm an addict. And to be able to share what that means. Because, one of the things that I've come to realize and what you learn in leadership is that people form beliefs based on experiences. And so there's some books out there that I've read and some trainings I've been to where it discusses how people need two experiences to form a belief.
Mhm.
And so, it's like, I heard this or I saw this, and then I heard this and saw this. So now I believe this. And so this addiction thing, or no matter what it is that typically it's surrounded by negativity,
Mm.
right? Nobody's talking about the addict that's addicted to public service.
Yeah.
Or the person that's addicted to helping children in other countries.
Yep.
Or the person that's addicted to donating monies or their personal time to like make their community better. Nobody talks about that. It's not on the news. It's not. What is the addict that was arrested for the fourth or the fifth occurrence of something.
Mhm.
And so I feel like we form these beliefs, not even knowing firsthand what it's about, just based on things that we've heard or experiences that other people have shared.
Yeah. And it's a whole cultural shift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I hear addict, sometimes, it's the person under the bridge, right? That's homeless doing heroin, right? That's the persona that's out there. But if we could do what you just spoke into, and everybody said that an addict is if it's channeled in the right way, and we're helping people and we're addicted to, spending money to improve, third world countries and whatever it may be. I mean, that's also an addict, and we can really start to break that stigma down and that persona of what exists out there, which is the reason so many people don't raise their hand to get help in the first place, because that's the label that they'll have. And unfortunately, that exists out there, but it's really it's not true. And we as a society need to come together and just smash that. So I love that you spoke into that.
Well, and I realized that during my marriage, and when I was, I would go weeks without drinking. I could go a long time. Like, I never really thought I had a problem, because I thought I controlled it. Like, I thought, I knew that when I did, I didn't shut it off, but I didn't understand that was the signs of being an alcoholic or having a problem.
Mhm.
I felt like the alcoholic was, again, I was in that belief that it was somebody that had to drink every day, or woke up needing to drink, always had a bottle. They always, they lived for that.
Mhm.
And so me thinking, well, that's not me, right? Because that's not what my addiction looks like. I'm not in that category,
Mhm.
right? And so, I was a highly functional alcoholic where I could, drink and pass out and sleep for 4 hours and then give a presentation in front of 1,000 people,
Mhm.
or have meetings or whatever the case was. And again, I didn't drink every day.
Mhm.
I didn't have to like wait, get off work and, oh, I need to go have a drink. My issue was when I did, I couldn't control it.
Mhm.
And so I had to come to terms with that.
What was the impact it started to have on your life? Because there was obviously a transitional moment, but what was the impact leading up to that point?
I think over the years, just self-reflection was, I wasn't as good as I possibly could be. It's one of those things like when you're an overachiever, like yourself, and when we're addicted to work and projects, man, nobody loves to give somebody something like they don't even know we're addicts, but man, I can relate with, let's give it to that person, right? That's where every year, whatever I'd move the family, go to another market, fix another problem, because I would over-index and I would devote all my time and energy to that project because of addiction, but not realizing, I'm like, well, that's career. That's what you do. That's work. But I didn't, home life balance didn't exist for me. Like that I wasn't addicted to being, great at home. I was addicted to the work. And as long as I applied myself that way, I was fulfilled. But the turning point for me was in 2014-ish to 2015 when I had moved to Texas. And the turning point for me, I remember calling my dad and I was like, I think I have a problem. And he was like, what's going on? I'm like, I said, I'm getting angry. I'm getting mad. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because it's like 9:10 and I go to buy liquor and there's no stores open. And I remember sharing, like, on Sundays, I was finding myself, like, the first Sunday, I remember, like, I was so livid, like, what do you mean I can't buy liquor? Not associating with having an issue, but I'm like, that's crazy. Everywhere I've lived in the country, I've lived in like 8 states, from the East Coast to the West Coast, you can always buy liquor. There may be 4 hours a day you can't buy liquor.
Not down in the Bible Belt.
But if you're in Texas, so I was Googling and trying to figure out how to drive to another state to buy liquor. And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, I got a problem. Like, that was my aha moment, was realizing that in my right mind, that nobody should be Googling how to drive like 5 or 6 hours to another state to buy liquor. And then what I found was, if I bought it on Friday or Saturday, it didn't work through Sunday, because again, I over-index. I drink it all. So I realized, like, well, that's not working for me. So my aha moments were just realizing was moving to Texas, and then the Sunday rule and the 9 p.m. rule really was a turning point for me.
So you stopped drinking before they delivered it to your house, because now they have some of those delivery services. That's what started to get me there at the end.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I always had other stuff delivered. You could always have that, but
those delivery services are tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, and so I thought in my right mind, I realized that I always drank too much when I did drink. And then I realized that I was to the point where I was needing it on the weekend when I wasn't working, but then I was consuming it all before Sunday, and then I wasn't able to get through Sunday, and then I was getting like irate and mad, and I'm like, who in their conscious mind gets angry because a store's closed? I'm like, that's a problem, So I can remember my father, who had come out to stay with me to try to be supportive, because I said, something's wrong. I've got an issue. And it's the first time in my life that I was acknowledging, wait a minute, I drank my whole life, had a career, but I never really thought I had a problem with stuff. And I had situations where I might have missed a meeting, or I did some, stuff wasn't in line, but it was never catastrophic. It was just like, I was never my best, but it was now at the point where I'm getting angry. So when he came out to stay with me and he started to see what I was going through, he gave me this phone number to call one Sunday morning. And he's like, you need to call this number, because I was like, I think I need to go to rehab. I need to get help somehow, because I'm not normal.
Did you two have that a close relationship like that?
We did. And what was funny was my father, who passed in 2019, he also was an alcoholic that hid it from the world. And my grandfather was an alcoholic. And I didn't know my grandfather. He passed before I was born. But, my father was, when when I was going through recovery and I was going through meetings and these types of things, like, I would find empty bottles of Crown in the apartment and under his sink.
So he was still drinking when you approached him?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was drinking till the day he passed, having stuff delivered to his place when he was in Oregon. And having family members bring it to him. And he was the epitome of the denial, or not accepting that there was an issue. So when he gave me that phone number to call, the person that answered the phone said, hey, can you not drink today? And it was the number to AA. And I'm like, of course, it's Sunday. I'm in Texas. Like, what do you, I'm like kind of irritated. Like, What do you mean? I don't have any liquor. If I had, I wouldn't be calling this number. So
he was very supportive.
He was immensely supportive. He was so supportive when I first started going through meetings. I got back in. I was plagued with a back injury for about 7 years. I was taking pills. Like, I had to go through therapy, and then the pills, you get addicted to those because we're addicts. So there's a need for stuff initially, and it's a benefit because I couldn't hardly walk, and I had to get epidurals every 4 months for my back for sciatica, and I had a protruding disc, which was a legitimate issue. But then you become addicted to these pills because of the way it makes you feel, and then you take more than you should, because that's what we do, right? We over-index, and if there's more in the bottle, you take it till you pass out, or at least that's what I did. But he was very supportive through this process of recovery, getting on track, getting back with a personal trainer, getting my fitness routine back in. And I can remember each night I'd come home and he would just talk about, how was your meeting? He would talk about, how was the training? You're looking good, son. And he would say things like, I don't know what you're going through because, I've never had that problem. But
he hadn't opened up to you at this point.
Oh, at all. No, his whole life, he passed with that. He passed with this with him thinking that nobody knew. And, he was supportive. I think we were together about a year in Texas before I had moved and he had moved back to Oregon. But, during that time, it was like he'd go in his bedroom and I wouldn't see him after a certain time. And, then I wouldn't see him for a couple of days, and we lived in the same apartment, 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. But he would, he'd be gone, and I'd go to clean up or something, and I'd find like empty bottles of Crown under a sink. And, the same person who's supporting you, the same person who's telling you that they don't really understand or relate to what you're going through, but they believe in you and they support you, is like, calling the kettle black. I'm like, but I never called him out on it. I listened to him because I felt like that was his way of maybe, being a father, or being a good father, was just to support me with what I was doing. But obviously going through meetings, I understood he was still in denial and he hadn't got past step one, which is the accepting, that you have a problem. And I knew that he was probably never do that,
Wow. But he was there with you the whole time. That's amazing.
He was there with me the whole time.
That's amazing. So were you in corporate still then when you got sober?
Yeah, I was an executive. I was vice president for the hearing company.
Okay. In
Texas. And so, that's when I got sober. I went to my first meeting. I met with the guy after I called that Sunday, January 25th of 2015, and somebody came pick me up and took me to my first meeting. And there was, I didn't know what to expect. I'm a believer that you have to assess things for yourself. So I never, when you go into a company and you go into a location or stores, people always want to tell you all the stuff. And I don't want to hear this stuff. I want to assess things myself. I don't want to come up with a belief on other people's experiences on the current situation. And so when I went to this meeting, I didn't do a bunch of research on AA. I didn't do a bunch of research on anything. I went into it with an open mind, allowing it to present itself for what I felt like it needed to be, which was let me listen. And I never had felt so comfortable in my life to listen to other people or feel like I wasn't going to be judged. Nobody wanted to know my last name. Nobody, or how to pronounce it or anything, right? Like they didn't want to know my title. They didn't want to know who I knew. Like, they didn't want to know what I did. They just wanted to make sure I was there and to be able to share. And then I listened to these people's stories and I was like, that's me, like in a roundabout way, the things that I heard that night, I had never listened to anybody talk about what their life was like. And you had people that were 18, 19, 20. You had people that were, 60, 70, 80 years of age. You had every ethnicity. You had nobody judging you for what you look like, who you were. It was the most comforting feeling to me to just be welcomed, genuinely by everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never knew that you could feel like that in society, let alone knowing that you have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. I loved being in that environment.
Was there any resistance that you had to making that phone call or going into the room?
Yeah, I sat at that. I looked at that piece of paper for 3 hours. It was like 2 or 3 hours. And mind you, I'd done a lot of stuff in my life. And I looked at a piece of paper with a phone number on it, not knowing what was going to happen, for like well over 2 hours. And I can remember my father coming in, knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, have you called yet?" And I was like, "No," because I was contemplating and I had all of these emotions on, it was kind of like you were going to go skydive for the first time or jump off a bungee jump or something. Like you were right there on the edge. And I needed like to be pushed because I felt like something was holding me back. And it was the most intimidating thing for me. Again, I'd done a lot of stuff, but to call this phone number, not knowing what to expect was very intimidating. So yeah, it was a 2 or 3 hour process looking at a number on a piece of paper in my bedroom.
And then you were all in.
Once I went to the meeting, other than the fact that somebody said you got to come 90 days, 90 and 90. And I remember looking at that lady, I was like thinking to myself, I'm going to try to come back tomorrow. We're going to start there.
One day at a time right here.
I wasn't thinking I was like, and even to this day, Jen, I look at life literally a day at a time. Relationships, life, opportunities, career, everything I do is in that same mindset. It's literally, I'm going to get through today. I'm going to make it the best day. I'm going to work to have a positive influence. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to find the best in every situation. I'm going to do that today. And then tomorrow, if I'm blessed to wake up, I'm going to do that again tomorrow. But the thought of, can you go on tour for X amount of time, or could you go through every holiday or go to every event and never drink? Like, I don't think that way. And I think for me, it's what's helped me in recovery, which is just literally taking a day at a time. And so I always recommend to folks, like, whether it's work or relationships or whatever, just take it a single day and work through that day. And, I have friends that are going through things with their marriages, or they're going through different things in their life. And they're like, well, I don't know if I can do this another 5 years. Like, why are we thinking about 5 years? Just think about tomorrow, today, and then work yourself into tomorrow. So I take a lot of what I've learned in recovery with the people I've worked with and how to apply that to everything in my life,
I want to talk about this positivity piece of you, because that was really how I connected to your posts. And when everything made sense in my mind, it's because I believe that what we have to do in recovery in order to survive, which is to look at ourselves in the mirror, to look at our character defects, to go through our resentments, to make amends, all of these things we do in order to survive. Everybody really should be doing them, but they don't, but we have to. And so that's why everything made sense in my mind when you mentioned that you were in recovery, because I thought, is this guy just really passionate? Is he just really into mindset? Because you just don't find a lot of people outside of coaches or whatnot that are really involved in that. And so when I realized that you were part of the recovery community, that all made sense. So this positive piece of you, has that always existed? Has this been created sort of out of the learnings and this new revamp 2.0, Dean?
Yeah. Well, I think that the positivity has always kind of been there in, like, me as a person and my spirit. The on purpose with direction has definitely been through recovery. So the communicating it, the working to share it, I've had folks, you're too happy. And I'm like, you don't want to see me not be happy.
Mm.
Right. Like, and I've always told
People
folks,
tell
like,
you that you're too happy?
I've had people tell me I'm too happy. And it's okay, because sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness.
Mm.
They take things like you always being happy as that you can't be tough enough. And
Mm.
it's not, it's kind of a countermeasure. It's kind of a countermeasure because I was the toughest person to work with.
Mm.
Like, I think one of the toughest as a leader.
Mm.
Um, the people that I work with, I would do anything for, and they would do anything. All my relationships in my life, they still stay in touch with me today. 20 years later, I have hourly associates, I have supervisors, managers. They still stay. They'll joke about how tough I was.
Mm.
Yeah, I was happy. I was tough, and I think it's kind of a countermeasure for myself. And I think it's like even from like, I remember, like, from a security perspective, or like looking after somebody, I'm like, you don't want me to be upset.
Mm.
Right? Like, when I go to the gym, it's my hour of focus. I don't talk to anybody. I probably look, maybe, I have to smile, because what I do is I put all of that energy and all of that, I don't want to say anger, but all that focus into, like, mentally, to exhausting myself physically.
Mm.
And so I get done, I'm like, I'm done. And it's like, why are you smiling? It's because I literally put every ounce of everything in that I had. And my father, and I always kind of reference him. I reference him a lot because he was such a huge impact on my life. But he always found the good. He was never judgmental. We were talking one time about how you were forced to select your ethnicity, and he would always check the other. And he told me this a few years back before he passed. We were talking about forms and, like, how society kind of, like, makes you, like, work against other people. And you have boxes to check about who you are, or what you are, like what you're associating with now. But he would check other, and he'd write American. And so he had been doing that his whole life, was that he didn't put down an ethnicity. There was always another box, and then you had to put what it was, and he would just write American. He'd been doing it his whole life. And so he was telling me about how, to find the good in everything and everybody. And so I used to do that somewhat, but I wasn't as religious with that as I am today. And I think it's because when he passed 2 years ago, one of the very last things, I was fortunate to spend, like, the last 10 days of his life with him and watch him go through that process of moving on. And I feel like I'm so blessed to have experienced that with him. And one of the last things that he said to me was, no matter how bad the world is or the situation, he's like, Dino, find the good. Mm-hmm. And it was so, I mean, he'd always say that to me, but it didn't have the same effect as that last week of his life, of one of the last complete sentences that's said to you. And it's like, so even to the pandemic, I was dealing with, there was no touring. There's all this stuff going on, and people trying to figure stuff out. And I was always positive. I applied myself. Because I think about the choice we have. We have a choice of how we view things. That's our choice. Mm-hmm. We can, I know that if I drank, I can't control what happens. If I do certain, take certain things, I can't control that. I can control whether or not I do it, to an extent, right? So with our outlooks and how we view things and the positivity, that's a choice. We can wake up and choose. Like, I look forward to each day of what I feel to share, right? To somehow have a positive impact, because I want to share what's going on. And if it can help and affect somebody else, we all deal with shit. Make no mistake. We all deal with financial stuff, relationship stuff. We all make bad decisions. Like, I'm not, it isn't because you're positive you don't mess up, or it isn't because you're positive that you don't make mistakes, or you wish you would have done things differently. But how we view things each day and allow others to see that, that's us. And that's a choice we can control. So I work on that.
I see it every day. And you are the top of the algorithm. I think you're the only one. And maybe now I'll start putting memes in there because I like to interact, but I was like, I don't know where the that's like a whole nother conversation. Like what's social etiquette of how much you communicate, with.
See, and for me, I don't care, right? Because I do it with good intent. And so again, like, what is somebody else's interpretation of it? If you want to do it, your life, you do it.
All right. Well,
you emoji away, you do your memes, because that's where I'm coming from. That space is just, we like look for others, or look to others for guidance or thoughts, or something okay. Is it politically okay? Is it not okay? No, you do you. You do the best you can be, and that's only going to be determined by you. Yeah. Nobody else.
Well, this is inspirational for me. So,
if you want to problem something, say it, whatever. I can remember I was doing stuff. I first started managing this band, Rev Theory, and I'd known the guys forever. But I started working with them, and I started working on our posts. And I would put these baby things, like these baby mimes, and it's like, it was like this yelling baby, and it's like, and I'd put the thing in about, I want my Rev Theory today, and it would have the background music of one of their songs. Oh. And so Julian, one of the founding members, a guitarist, I remember about a month into it, him was like, dude, I don't like the baby thing. It's not us. It's not me. And I was like, okay. Like, I didn't get my feelings hurt. Nothing. I was like, move on.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay. If that's not what somebody else is feeling and you work with somebody, I'm okay. Check. No more baby stuff.
I love it.
But so you do you.
Yeah. All right. Well, here we go. Here come the floodgates. I'm putting memes and stuff because that's what I do. So I know now, I mean, your whole world has opened up and it's completely different from where it was 5 years ago. And now the pandemic is lifting, at least. I think maybe Texas is pioneering in some ways right now, but what's coming up in your world? What's going on? What can we expect?
I would tell you, as of like 3 weeks ago, my cousin had called me and said, hey, can you get on this call? And I got on this call. He asked me to call him back. And so there's nothing like being caught off guard, but in our world, like, everything's okay, right? Because we've dealt with everything, and so I call him back, and he there's like 2 other guys on the phone, and he's like, hey, this is my cousin Dean. So I think I'm just calling a family member back, but he puts me on a conference call. And so this conference call's got a famous actor on it. It's got a producer on there. And so he's like, hey, it's my cousin Dean. He does this, and this. And so anyway, we were talking through this documentary project. And so now we've brought on a producer who's a friend of mine that has produced some Emmy-nominated documentaries and film. She got a PhD from Princeton. She's just like a legitimate, just badass, right? And so she wants to do the project. And so we've got people on the phone now for like funding. We started assembling this team. So in the last, up until like 3 weeks ago, I spent a lot of time just on music and artists. But now it's kind of evolved into film as a executive producer on a project, which will only lend itself, I'm sure, with my life into so many other things. But I've got, 5 artists, I've got Rev Theory that I work with. And, we've got a tour coming up this January and February of 2022 over in Europe. So they haven't been back to Europe since they were with Evanescence in 2008. They've a lot of notoriety, but been working with them on releasing music this last year. And we have new stuff coming up here this next month, 2 months after that, and then we'll release an album. And then I have a band, Dreamers Crime, that actually out of Australia, that has new music coming out this next month in video. We're planning their tour. Chaos Magic is a Chilean metal band, female fronted, out of Chile. We've got a new album coming out. We've got her going to go to Europe in 2022 as well. I work with a band here in the US, Eve to Adam. And Eve to Adam, what's funny about them is I've known them forever. They've toured. When I first met them, they were opening for Daughtry when Daughtry had first got off American Idol. And I met these guys back then, and it was about '08. And I can remember their manager at the time, they weren't signed to a label, so they had their manager talk to me about how to get into Best Buy. So this kind of goes back to the beginning of stuff and some of these relationships. And they were the last band to tour with Creed. So Creed's last tour that they did as a band, Eve to Adam was the support band for them. And I went to 5 shows that year, and I didn't know Scott. I didn't know the band. I didn't know Creed. I was with Taki and Eve to Adam on their bus, and we would talk about stuff and, get sloshed and do all kinds of extracurricular activities, like just do what you do, right? You're with rock bands. And this was 2012, 2013. So I hadn't yet got to the place where I was going to be. I was still over indexing those things. But the irony of everything was, here was this artist that I had known, and fast forward. So I just started working with Eve to Adam. They asked me to manage them. And, the irony of it was I didn't even know Scott. They weren't even friends. It wasn't even something that my life has just kind of totally changed. So I work with them. We're going to release some stuff this year. They want to go to Europe as well. And back in '08, I was working in corporate, I was working in retail, but I knew how to help in certain respects. And so I can remember helping their management because they weren't signed to a major label and getting into Best Buy stores, and then going and hanging out and say, what if somebody said, what are the chances of you working with these people now that you didn't even know back then? Like, people said, well, there's no way, So, working with those guys, Tulip's actually a band. It's a female-funded band out of Dallas, and we're planning some stuff. We've got an album that they just sent me this last week that I'll be shopping to labels with them. So I'll decide whether or not I want to release it through my label or if I'll release it through some other labels. And so, we're going to be planning some touring for them. Their singer Ashley is a professionally trained opera singer out of Canada. So she did the opera circuit. So she's transitioned over into music. So her and her husband, they do a tremendous job. So I have these projects. Everybody's got new music. Everybody's got new videos. We've got tours being planned. And oh, by the way, we're going to work on movies too. So.
Well, I hope you had some downtime in 2020, because it sounds like 2021 and beyond, is
well, I'm addicted
going on.
to work. Is so, it's not, and it hasn't changed. So I've come to the acceptance of that. So before I thought about work, and I was like, man, I didn't go to enough games for my kids. I didn't attend enough functions. And so for a while, it kind of waited on me. But through recovery and through this process of understanding who I am, being accepting of who I am and what's important, I've realized that the work for me and accomplishing outcomes is an addiction, and it's always been there, and it's not going to go away. And I've accepted the fact it's not a bad addiction to have.
Yeah.
So I just work.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
I love it. And the work is finding you now. It's just.
And the work is finding me, and it's stuff I enjoy doing and learning, and again, being able to help others in their careers and paying it forward. The best thing about working with people is just seeing them thrive, right? Teaching them, mentoring, developing, and then watching them progress, building a career with them where they get to buy their first house, or, working with an artist and seeing the residual income come in, or opening doors for them, or getting them on a tour that they've always. I have one artist that they asked me if I would reach out to somebody. All the guys are like professionals. They all work in other fields. Some are executives, but they play music, and they want to go on a tour with a famous band. And I won't name names, but they want to go on a tour with a couple different bands. So I've reached out to those bands and their booking agent, and we've arranged that they'll look to tour with one of these 2 bands. And they're going to invest a serious amount of capital in their own tour, because instead of going to Hawaii on vacation or spending money on doing something, they're all going to invest this money, and it'll probably cost them $20,000 or $30,000. They want to go tour the U.S. as a dream, with one of these national acts, and they'll do it. And so it's kind of cool because they're great guys. They put out great music, and you know, I'm going to help them fulfill like one of their dreams, which has been to tour with one of these major nationally or internationally known acts as the support band on a tour. And I'm like, you know, how cool is that to be able to help somebody achieve their dream? So,
well, I love it. You are such an inspiration. This has been such an honor, really, to talk to you, and it's fun because I do see so much motivational, you know, content coming from you daily, and it resonates from you. And I love that you spoke into your addiction in a healthy way. And I think that's a good message for all of us to hear, that addiction is not a bad thing if
right.
you channel it in the right way. And so we will definitely be following along. I know it sounds like lots of music coming out. I think everyone's probably looking forward to shows coming up. I know I am. I'm a big fan of going to concerts, and
Well, we'll have to go.
yes. I am. I actually live across from a music hall, and so it's just sitting there. I see the box office when I look out my door. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, we'll see you, I guess, maybe on film as well. So lots of exciting things coming up.
Lots of great stuff happening. Yes.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and
Thank you for
appreciate
having
your
me today. I greatly appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we'll get together soon. We'll go out, enjoy some music. And yeah, again, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to Recovery Today magazine. I am Jen Sugarmeyer, your correspondent. And until next time, cheers.